Craig, why don't you jump us into Michael Alford, because you had that up and I needed to listen to it again because we've been, again, you see this gigantic new graphics package. I'm a little bit behind today, so.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Alford, there's a clip going around. I hadn't listened to the whole interview. I just hadn't had the opportunity to do so yet, but he was on Sirius and joining Danny Kanell and Dusty Dvorak on their show, and they just flat out asked him. Obviously, Kanell, being an FSU guy, has a lot of interest in Dvorak as a Sooner now in the SEC. There's obviously some interest, I'm sure, just as a college fan on his part as well, but also just that's a team that definitely sees eye to eye with a Florida State and would be interested, I think, in the possibility of that being another team that joins them in the future or joins the other big league. But they just flat out asked Michael Alford, Florida State athletic director, about the future for Florida State and the ACC and just what kind of all that looks like. And he said that you look at all your options, or I guess the example that he used was that you run out every ground ball, and he used baseball to kind of break it down. So you run out every ground ball, and that's what they're going to continue to do. So basically, they're looking at all their options, continue to look at all their options, and are going to exhaust them until they get where they ultimately want to be. But they want to be in one of those two conferences. I think that's very clear, and that's not anything surprising or new news. So in running out those ground balls, one of the things that he mentioned is that the revenue gap that's already here, but that is coming down the pipeline here, and just the next couple of years is going to be so significant that there's really just not even an option for them if they want to compete at the same level they feel they should be competing at. None of that's new news either.
Yeah.
None of that is anything newsworthy, really. But he did cite analytics and the growing revenue gap that's coming, about how the splits between the haves and the have-nots are going to get worse and worse and worse. And basically the big gist of what he had to say, other than just the obvious and kind of stating already what's known, is that his exact quote was, "You're seeing networks really consolidate the major brands of college football, and they want brand on brand being played against each other, and that's something that we see. That's something that we think is not finished. We think there's even more change coming in the upcoming years, and we are taking this day by day." So interesting that he cites the networks who are like, we are not doing anything. We're just we're going with the schools want to say, and we know that's not the case, and they know that we know that's not the case, but they're far more heavy-handed in this than I think we realize sometimes. And so if you're the networks, if you're those paying the millions of dollars to get the best matchups possible, you want the best matchups possible. I don't know, like, big picture, like, do you squeeze all the toothpaste out of that tube as far as the elite matchups go, and then you still want the other teams. You want the other games, but are you just going to, like, suffocate them with lower and lower pay so that there's, like, this really well-funded NFL-style group of schools, and then these other ones that are just lucky to be on TV that you pay peanuts, basically? Because that's what it feels like the strategy has become, kind of like with the whole ACC debacle. Is like, you're like, they certainly wouldn't get rid of the ACC, but if they could pay peanuts compared to what they're paying now and still have all of that inventory at their disposal, that's where you see them, if you believe in just the scheming that's going on, in the worst case scenario, you can certainly look at the networks and see where that would be perhaps a strategy for them. It's like, we get Florida State in the Big Ten, and we get to have them against Michigan and Michigan State and whoever else, and we still have the ACC, but we're paying them half as much as we were paying them, and they still fill all these time slots for us. Like, something seems like it's going to have to give there if that were to be the case. But Alford's saying, the networks want to consolidate further. There's more change coming in that regard, and they want brands on brands. So he did say that this is not what he wants. He said that he wishes that we could go back to 2005. He says, "I really do, because I had a great experience, but times have changed, and you can't look back. You've got to look forward, and you've got to anticipate what changes are coming. You've got to prepare yourself and your institution to be able to adapt quickly and be prepared on the forefront for those changes." So everybody's looking out for their own hide, as per usual, and as you should be doing if you're the Florida State Athletics Director, or if you're the Texas Tech Athletics Director, or the KU Athletics Director, or whoever else. But he does say he wishes he could go back to 2005, and I bet he does, because you didn't have to pay players. You didn't have half these lawsuits, or really any of them at that point. and everything was the old traditional way where, people like him got the bulk of the money and got to spend the rest of it on juicy facilities and didn't have to worry about lawsuit after lawsuit. But I do think that he doesn't mean so much that as he means of just like the harmony that we lived with college football just being college football still at that point and not what it's turned into 20 years later, which is just a mutated version of that. And what its final form is, we don't even quite know yet. So, yeah, I think we all wish we could go back to 2005, sans the players not getting paid. If you could somehow bring back the way 2005 felt, but have the players getting paid like they could have done all the way back then and avoided all this, that would have been great. But hindsight's 2020, and so everybody got fat and happy and waited until the last possible moment to finally fork over some dollars because they were forced to. So, yeah, 2005 is a pipe dream, and we're never returning to that. But he does wish we could go back to that era. So that's all nothing earth-shattering, just more reinforcement of kind of what we know, that Florida State's looking to be a part of the upper echelon, so to speak, and they're exhausting every avenue possible to try and figure out how to do that. And everybody pines for the good old days when they didn't have to worry about all of the money and where it's going. But, like I said, those days are dead. Yeah, they are. And it's really – it's sad in a lot of respects. And again, progress waits for no one a lot of the time. And I do like that he's not he said, we got to run at every ground ball. So he didn't say that, they're not under the guise of, because a lot of this stuff has happened with no, our full intention is to work something out with the conference we're in, knowing that, in the post-Texas OU world, that's not really how we work anymore, and I don't know if it was really especially if you look at the demise of the Pac-12, I don't know if it was really the complete intent of everybody in the Pac-12. I mean, obviously, Washington and Oregon, once they heard what they wanted to hear, left, so it was never really their full intention to work it out with the Pac-12. If it was, then they would have, right? Right. So yeah, it was never. It was no. It's one of those where you forced me to do this. You left me no choice. I had to leave, and it's you were already wanting to leave anyways. Yeah, you were waiting on the text message saying you up. Yeah. And as soon as you got that, you were like, all right, peace out. And that's all it was. But before the fact, you wanted it all to work out. Of course you did. But as soon as you got that text message, you were out of there. I promise you that there was if it was if you're talking about hey, who's Craig, who's that hot chick going to the prom with? And you're like, oh, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington be like, UCLA? Why not me? I'm good looking. I win. What have they done in football? Why do they want them? This is not a basketball thing, and that's been a long time for them too. I mean, what? That's how it reacted. And they're like, well, we're gonna be the best teams in the Pac-12. We'll get a TV deal, and then I cannot wait for the book to be written where everybody feels comfortable enough to just put all the cards out on the table, where nobody's worried about their relationships anymore, and that whole thing where it's we kind of knew, in January that this thing was over, as opposed to, right before it, as we've heard, oh, we thought we were going to have a deal right before. And you're like, man, how many of you saw that deal with the selling candy door to door and took it? The ACC's in that same spot right now. At least Michael Alford is not going out there saying well, we fully intend to be back in the ACC and do that. No, they really don't. I mean, that's plan X for them. But the big difference though, Paul, is that they're under a contract. Yeah, that's the whole heart of the dispute, is that they don't have a TV deal that's coming up that they're negotiating. And if they don't get a TV deal, then everybody's free to go, basically. No. They are under lock and key based on what we know right now, although some will dispute that, but based on what we know right now, they are under lock and key for another decade, right? So, or a decade plus, actually. So that's where we are. We know that if there was a year remaining that they were negotiating with Apple, and you could put out all the infographics and everything you want to, but if that was the case, they'd already be gone, because somebody would have been like, oh, y'all are free next year? I know y'all are working on that new TV deal over in the ACC, but hey, if that didn't work out for you, you interested in coming over here? I think that would be like we saw this past summer, or we saw prior with Texas and Oklahoma, where there was a date on the horizon that was soon enough that you could theoretically make it happen and make it make sense. that was I think easy decisions for those involved. I think it was easier decisions for the Pac schools than people actually. I think that's a lot of like just I don't know. People wanting it to be that way, like romanticize it all, and like no way the Pac wanted to fall apart and all the history and all that. I think people were much more just business-like about it than the romanticized version of it all. But that's not the case here. There's not just a couple years remaining. There's not just a matter of months remaining for this contract. There are years. And so until proven otherwise, they are bound by that contract. And yes, there are people trying to shoot numerous holes through that thing and set it on fire and find any way to prove that it doesn't really exist and it can't be enforced. And if they can find a way to do that, then I think we know what happens. And it's that big lever gets pulled and this all starts to fracture, at least with, a couple, if not, a couple of those schools. But that's the big difference here. So we know what their intention is. We know they want out, but it's one of those things where you're not allowed out yet.
Yeah.
You're simply not allowed. No matter how loud you yell, you're grounded. You can't leave. You are grounded. I don't care how much of a temper tantrum you throw. I don't care what you promise you're going to do if you don't get what you want. It doesn't matter. You signed this. You are bound by it. And so until they otherwise are not bound by that contract, or until they come up with a different solution, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, then it is what it is. But yeah, their desired outcome has been made very clear. It's just not been pinpointed exactly where that would be, but it's a 50-50 choice. And so that's pretty simple. But there is this whole pesky matter of, you got to prove that you can get out of this thing or find another alternative. And so that's where we are, and that's where we remain. And the quickest solution there also remains a settlement of some sort. Can we get there? I don't know. Sooner rather than later. That's what everybody's wondering at the moment, kind of like with the Pac-12 TV deal. Everybody had their own opinion on it, but the main core of it always was, no matter what anybody wanted to say, of can they get the right TV deal? And in this case, it's can they come to an agreement, or can they prove that can they come to a settlement or agreement, or can they prove that contract is not what it turns out to be? And if they can, it's as simple as that. Then they are going to be free to go sooner rather than later. But there is that part of it that, I don't know. It might be enforceable, and it might be too much money to bite off for either, a Florida State, a Clemson, a North Carolina, whoever right now. And if that's the case, then kick and scream all you want, but it benefits the ACC none whatsoever to just be like, you know what, we're tired of hearing you yell. You go ahead and leave, and we'll just deal with it later on.
Yeah, and the thing is that, there's like two arguments on the TV network's part, on ESPN's part. It's like, couldn't ESPN get rid of this, reform it, make it cheaper, and then, funnel those schools to another place where they want to be and then make more money off of them? Or could you keep those schools anchored in the ACC and then be getting, some premier football matchups on the cheap, right? Like there's all those different thoughts of it. But yeah, this is a completely different thing. And I thought it would be a matter of time before somebody tried to challenge it. I just didn't think it would happen that soon, because it seemed like, maybe like 2 or 3 years in, to be like, all right, we've got to figure this out.
Once the Big Ten TV deal became clear and you saw how much money those schools were getting, you're like, oh, let's. I don't want to use the same examples. Let's go Northwestern today. Florida State's going Northwestern. Like, we get it, like Chicago area, that kind of thing, but a lot of history, but they're not competing for national championships. We're trying to compete for national championships here. We're not bringing in the ratings like we're bringing in the ratings. They don't have the titles like we have the titles. And so once all that started occurring, and then the SEC TV deal and all of the other movement, and you start to see, we're like, oh, well, the Big 12 is a solid conference, but they're suddenly without their big blue chips, and we consider ourselves to be amongst those. And we're watching USC and Washington and Oregon leave, and we're watching Oklahoma and Texas leave, and we look around, and we're the only ones on our same island that are like them still. So what are we doing? We got to get off this thing. And so it's just a matter of timing, I think, of those contracts, the realignment pieces, and then suddenly realizing, oh my God, we're on this island that doesn't have a future that's growing all that much because of the contract that we signed, and we're surrounded by a lot of teams that aren't quite up to snuff as compared to what it would look like on the other side of the fence. And in their opinion, the grass is greener, and the money's a lot greener too, and that's really the focal point of this entire thing. So, it's different in that the Pac-12, it was either or. You're getting a TV deal, or there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah.
And they didn't get it in time, or it wasn't satisfactory enough, and so their arrogance or what have you, or lack of a better offer eventually brought them down. This is purely being played out in the courtrooms, and that's why it's so unpredictable. No matter how many times you hear, a guarantee of this is happening or that's happening, I don't think anybody's really able to do that right now because it's in the hands of the lawyers, and we don't know how close settlement talks could be, or just how far apart those could be, and we have absolutely no idea whatsoever how any of these various courts that are involved are going to rule on these cases. So it is a fascinating story, and we know kind of what the end looks like in terms of what some of the parties want, but a timing part of this is completely unknown. It could be next week. It could be, later on this summer. It could be sometime next year, depending on like how the contract kicks in and what ESPN decides to do. But it's sooner rather than later. Big decisions are going to have to be made. It's also, though, not as much on the forefront, I feel, though, as the whole Pac-12 debacle was.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a break. We'll come back.